You know, there's something about reading someone's actual words, their private emails, the things they thought would never see the light of day. That changes everything. It's one thing to hear denials in a carefully prepared interview. It's another to see what someone wrote when they thought no one was watching. And that's exactly what happened with Prince Andrew. For years, we've heard his side of the story. The famous BBC interview, the Pizza Express alibi, the claim he couldn't sweat. But recently released emails have pulled back the curtain on what was really happening behind palace walls. And the gap between what Andrew said publicly and what he was doing privately is staggering. Today, we're going through these revelations together, not to pile on, but because understanding how powerful people operate in the shadows matters for all of us. Hello viewers, before we dive into this newly released emails, please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Your support allows us to update you with more fascinating news from the British monarchy. Jeffrey Epstein, convicted sex offender, financier, and someone who cultivated relationships with the rich and powerful, died in 2019. But the questions about who knew what and when have never stopped. Prince Andrew has consistently claimed his association with Epstein was limited, professional, that once Epstein's crimes came to light in 2008, Andrew distanced himself appropriately. In that infamous 2019 Newsnight interview, he portrayed himself as someone who made an error in judgment by visiting Epstein in 2010, but maintained he wasn't close to the man and didn't witness anything inappropriate. Here's what Andrew told Emily Maitlis. I stayed with him, and that's the bit that I kick myself for on a daily basis because it was not something that was becoming of a member of the royal family. Note the language, not becoming. Not morally wrong to associate with a convicted sex offender, but rather, it looked bad for the brand. These weren't leaked by some tabloid. They emerged through legal proceedings, the kind of official channels that make them hard to dismiss. And what they show is a relationship that was far more extensive, far more comfortable, and far more recent than Andrew ever admitted. The emails reveal ongoing communication well after Epstein's 2008 conviction. We're not talking about a single awkward encounter Andrew regrets. We're seeing continued coordination, invitations, and what appears to be genuine friendship. One particularly striking detail: emails show Andrew's team coordinating with Epstein's people about meetings and visits. This isn't someone reluctantly maintaining minimal contact. This is active relationship management. Even more damning, some emails suggest Andrew was informed about the nature of Epstein's activities and the concerns people were raising, yet the relationship continued. The famous 2010 visit to Epstein's mansion, the one Andrew admitted to on television, wasn't an isolated lapse in judgment. The emails reveal it was part of an ongoing pattern. And here's what really gets me. In public, Andrew expressed remorse for that 2010 visit. But the private communications show no such hesitation at the time. There's a gap between the carefully crafted public narrative and the casual reality of those private exchanges. Now, some of you might be thinking, why should I care about some prince and his emails? I've got my own problems. Fair question. Let me tell you why this matters to all of us. First, it's about accountability. When powerful people, whether they're royalty, politicians, CEOs, or celebrities, can say one thing publicly while doing another privately, it erodes the entire concept of truth. If we accept that disconnect, we're saying there are different rules for different people. Second, this is about how institutions protect their own. The royal family is one of Britain's most powerful institutions, and watching how they've handled this crisis tells us something about how power operates everywhere. The initial response wasn't transparency, it was damage control. It wasn't about victims, it was about reputation management. Third, and perhaps most importantly, this is about the victims. While we're talking about emails and public relations disasters, there are real women whose lives were destroyed by Epstein. Every revelation that shows how powerful men enabled or ignored his behavior is another reminder that those women were telling the truth all along, even when people didn't want to listen. Virginia Giuffre, who accused Andrew of sexual abuse, which he denies and settled a civil case over, has been vindicated in many ways by these emails. They support her claims that Andrew was much closer to Epstein than he ever admitted. Whether you believe her specific allegations about Andrew or not, these emails prove the broader context she described was real. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night. This pattern isn't unique to Prince Andrew. We see it everywhere. Harvey Weinstein had enablers who knew. R. Kelly had people who looked the other way. In corporate America, in politics, in religious institutions, wherever there's power, there are people who know things they're not saying and people saying things they know aren't true. The Andrew emails are just one example of a much larger problem, the gap between public accountability and private reality. And what enables that gap? A few things, actually. First, there's plausible deniability. Notice how institutions are structured so that the powerful can always claim they didn't know the full extent. The emails were handled by assistants. The meetings were arranged by others. There's always a buffer. Second, there's the benefit of the doubt that comes with status. When someone is a prince, we want to believe they're honorable. When someone is a respected businessman or philanthropist, we assume they're doing good. That assumption creates cover. Third, there's our own discomfort with the truth. It's unsettling to acknowledge that people we've celebrated might be complicit in terrible things. It's easier to accept the carefully crafted narrative than to sit with the messy reality revealed in those emails. First, we get comfortable with evidence over narrative. The Newsnight interview was compelling television. Andrew seemed earnest, detailed, specific. But the emails are documentation. When there's a conflict between someone's story and their documented actions, believe the documentation. Second, we recognize that powerful people have powerful tools for managing their image. PR teams, lawyers, media connections, all of these things can create a version of reality that sounds convincing. The Andrew case teaches us to look beyond the official statement to the actual behavior. Third, we support systems of accountability that don't depend on voluntary disclosure. The only reason we know about these emails is because of legal processes that compelled their release. Transparency shouldn't be optional for the powerful. And finally, and I think this is crucial, we listen to the people who've been dismissed or silenced. The victims in the Epstein case were telling consistent stories for years. They were called liars, attention seekers, opportunists. The emails prove they were telling the truth about the circles Epstein moved in and the people who enabled him. You know what strikes me about the whole Andrew situation? It's how ordinary it is, in a way. Not the specifics. Those are extraordinary and disturbing. But the underlying behavior? That's familiar to anyone who's ever worked in an organization. We've all seen the boss who says one thing in the meeting and does another thing in private. We've all encountered the person whose public persona and private behavior don't match. We've all experienced institutions prioritizing their reputation over doing the right thing. Prince Andrew isn't an alien. He's what happens when privilege, power, and poor judgment collide, and when there aren't sufficient consequences to force course correction. The tragedy is that it took legal proceedings, public pressure, and years of advocacy to get these emails into the light. And even now, Andrew has faced remarkably few real consequences. He lost his military titles and royal patronages, yes, but he still lives in Royal Lodge, he still receives financial support, and he's never faced criminal charges. That's the power of institutional protection. And it's a reminder that without external pressure, from media, from legal systems, from public outcry, powerful people rarely hold themselves accountable. The Andrew emails matter because they're a case study in how truth eventually surfaces, even when powerful forces try to keep it buried. They matter because they vindicate people who were dismissed. They matter because they show us the tools powerful people use to manage reality, and how we can look past those tools to find the truth. If you're watching this and you're in your 20s, take note. This is how institutional power works. The people at the top will have the best stories, the most polished presentations, the most convincing denials. Your job is to look at what they do, not what they say. If you're watching this and you're in your 90s, you've seen this pattern play out countless times. The faces change, but the dynamics remain. Your wisdom matters. Share it with younger generations who are still learning to spot these patterns. And for everyone in between, remember that accountability requires participation. It requires us to pay attention, to demand evidence, to support systems that create transparency. The Andrew emails only came to light because people refused to let this story die. The gap between Andrew's public claims and his private contact with Epstein isn't just about one prince. It's about how power operates, how truth gets managed, and why we can't afford to look away. If this resonated with you, subscribe to this channel. We're going to keep examining how power works, how truth emerges, and how ordinary people can demand accountability from extraordinary institutions. Hit that notification bell, because these conversations matter, and they're not going away. Thanks for watching. And remember, the truth has a way of surfacing, even when it's buried in private emails. Our job is to be ready to recognize it when it does.